Have you ever noticed that you can explain a complicated idea for 20 minutes, but somehow struggle when someone asks, "So, how was your weekend?" You know you should answer normally, but your brain hesitates. You search for the right response. You analyze the question, you wonder how much detail they actually want. And eventually you say, "Fine." Then the conversation dies. Here's what's strange. This happens to some of the most intellectually active people. They can spend hours thinking about human behavior, consciousness, the future, or why people become who they become, yet a 5-minute casual conversation can feel painfully exhausting. Most people assume it's social awkwardness, but there's a deeper psychological reason. And there's one particular mental habit that makes this problem dramatically worse. The disturbing part? Many intelligent people mistake that habit for a sign of intelligence, and don't realize it's slowly isolating them. We'll come back to that. First, imagine someone asks you a simple question. What do you think about him? Most people answer quickly. He seems nice. But an analytical mind may immediately split the question into pieces. Nice in what context? Do I know him well enough to judge? Is he genuinely kind or simply socially agreeable? Am I judging his personality or his behavior? Suddenly, a 5-word question has created an internal investigation. And before you've constructed the most accurate answer, the conversation has moved on. This reveals the first problem. Complex thinkers often struggle with simple answers because simple answers feel incomplete. Their minds naturally notice contradictions, exceptions, hidden motives, and missing context. But everyday conversation isn't designed for perfect accuracy. It's designed for connection. Read that again psychologically. Your brain is trying to provide the correct response. The other person may simply be asking, "Are you here with me?" That difference can make a deeply engaged person appear strangely distant. But this pattern often starts much earlier than adulthood. Some intellectually curious children discover that expressing their full thoughts creates uncomfortable reactions. Maybe they asked too many questions. Maybe adults became impatient. Maybe classmates looked confused when they became excited about unusual subjects. So they adapted. They learned to shorten themselves. Before speaking, they began scanning people's faces. Will this sound weird? Am I over-explaining? Do they even care? Eventually, conversation stops being spontaneous. It becomes editing. If this is already making you see yourself differently, subscribe to Psychology Theories, because the next part explains something even stranger: why having more thoughts can actually make you less articulate. Here's the psychological twist. More thoughts do not always create better speech. Sometimes they create a bottleneck. Imagine 50 people trying to leave through one doorway at the same time. The room isn't empty. The doorway is overwhelmed. An analytical person may simultaneously notice their idea, 3 possible ways to explain it, the listener's facial expression, a possible misunderstanding, and the fear that they've already spoken too much. So they pause. Restart the sentence. Change direction. Then finally say, "Never mind." The other person sees silence. They don't see the entire debate that just happened behind it. And this is where intelligence can become tangled with fear. Not necessarily fear of people, fear of being misunderstood. When your identity is strongly connected to your thoughts, having those thoughts misinterpreted can feel deeply personal. You didn't simply communicate badly. It feels as if someone received the wrong version of you. So the mind creates a defense. Reveal less. But watch what happens next. The less you reveal, the less understood you feel. The less understood you feel, the more you assume people cannot understand you, and the more you believe that, the quieter you become. Do you see the trap? Intelligence may begin the pattern. Fear can keep it alive. Think about Plato's famous allegory of the cave. People spend their lives watching shadows on a wall, believing those shadows are reality. Then someone turns around and sees something beyond them. When that person tries to explain what they've discovered, communication becomes difficult. Not because everyone else is stupid, but because people can use the same words while speaking from completely different internal worlds. This is what many deep thinkers secretly crave. Not endless conversation, shared depth. They want someone to look in the same direction and say, "I see it too." But when they repeatedly fail to find that connection, something dangerous can happen. And this is the habit I warned you about at the beginning. They begin believing ordinary conversation is beneath them. Small talk becomes pointless. Normal people become boring. Silence becomes proof of superiority. But sometimes, what looks like intellectual independence is actually avoidance wearing expensive clothes. Tell me in the comments which part of this hit you the hardest. I genuinely want to know how many people experience this strange gap between thinking deeply and speaking normally. Because intelligence can become a prison when you use it to explain why nobody is worth connecting with. So how do you escape? First, stop answering only the words. Answer the intention. When someone asks, "How was your day?" they may not want a detailed report. They may be making what psychologists sometimes call a bid for connection. Recognizing the emotional purpose of a question removes the pressure to create the perfect response. Second, give people the simple version first. Think of your mind as a building with many rooms. You don't drag someone through every room the moment they enter. Open the first door. If they're curious, open another. Depth works better when it's discovered gradually. Third, question your obsession with precision. The next time you mentally rewrite a sentence 5 times before speaking, ask yourself, am I making this clearer, or am I trying to make misunderstanding impossible? Because those are not the same thing. Human connection requires the risk of being interpreted imperfectly. And fourth, become curious about people you initially find ordinary. This may be uncomfortable, but depth is not always visible in the first 5 minutes. The person discussing football may have spent years thinking about loss. The friend who constantly jokes may understand loneliness better than anyone you know. The quiet person beside you may have an internal world as complicated as yours. If you judge a mind by its opening conversation, you may walk away from people you would have loved to know. And now we reach the most difficult realization. Maybe you've spent years waiting for someone capable of entering your world, while never learning how to build a bridge into theirs. If you've stayed with me this far, chances are this message touched something familiar. Subscribe to Psychology Theories, because these are the conversations most people never have, yet they're often the ones that quietly change us. Your mind may always move faster than your mouth. You may always notice layers other people ignore. Some conversations may still leave you exhausted. But intelligence was never supposed to become a wall. You don't have to explain every thought. You don't have to prove how deeply you see. And you don't have to wait for a perfect person who magically understands your entire internal world. Sometimes wisdom is knowing how deeply to think. But sometimes, wisdom is knowing how simply to speak. Because perhaps the true measure of an intelligent mind isn't how far it can travel away from ordinary people, but whether, after exploring the deepest places, it still knows how to find its way back to another human being.